The word holistic has been around for over 100 years. It is frequently used for many different reasons, from wellness and business to education and management, holistic health, holistic approach, etc. Unfortunately, as adults, when we believe or think we know something, our minds become blocked to accepting any new knowledge that goes against what we already believe. So when I talk about holistic management, as soon as I use the word holistic, adults go immediately to their own preconceived ideas about what it is, and they become almost incapable of seeing that this involves paradigm-shifting new knowledge. Luckily, children pick up and adapt to these new insights very quickly because their minds have not yet become blocked. So, when it comes to the holistic management framework, what does the word holistic mean, and what makes this something entirely new and different? In this case, holistic is referring to being able to make complete or whole decisions. And until relatively recently, scientists had no idea that no human on Earth is born with the ability to do that. My father, Alan Savory, is a Zimbabwean scientist who has dedicated his entire life to finding out what it is about human management that has caused increasing environmental degradation over the centuries. One day he was sitting on his living room floor and he had the world's rapidly mounting problems written on cards all around him. Knowing they're connected, he was trying to find the missing piece of this puzzle. Droughts, floods, poverty, poaching, wildfires, violence, social breakdown, mass immigration to cities, economic instability, pandemics, and climate change. He could see that all of these are symptoms of environmental degradation, mainly desertification, and that they all fall into only 3 categories: social, economic, and environmental. And it dawned on him that while there are endless things we can manufacture or produce with our advancing technology, we do not manufacture or produce ourselves, our economies, or nature. Which led him to the question, if we do not manufacture these things, what is it that we do with them? And he began to work out that we make decisions about them. Every day, all of us make thousands of decisions about ourselves, our finances, and our environment. Another word for making decisions is management. In other words, we do not manufacture people, economies, or nature. We manage them. And they are the only things on Earth that we do manage. All of us make decisions about these things constantly, from individuals making daily decisions to governments developing policies for entire nations. Everything else falls under technology and tools, which we use to help make our lives more comfortable as we manage ourselves, our finances, and our environment. Our tools, or the things we make, are advancing rapidly, while the things we manage are declining rapidly. These discoveries showed 2 things. The things we manage are connected and complex, and the cause of our problems must be our management and how we make our decisions. So my father started to study management in depth. He began to break down every type of management he could find, past and present, and in 1983 he had a monumental breakthrough. He discovered what we now know to be an outdated flaw in the way we make decisions. And it can be found through all ages and cultures, from managing families to entire nations. We believe we have many different ways of managing, but no matter what type of management he looked at, when he traced things to the core or to the point of decision itself, he found that every human makes every conscious decision the same way. He uncovered the fact that no matter who we are or what we are managing, we all subconsciously follow an identical process. It is genetically inherited. We are born with it. He also discovered that this process is not just inherent in us, but in all tool-using animals. And just like all other tool-using animals, our technology started off as simple stick and stone tools. This instinctive decision-making process worked perfectly for us when our tools were simple. Because our decisions were simple, We only had social needs to address, and we could not harm or manage nature with our basic tools. We lived in balance with our environment, and we could meet short-term objectives with no damaging longer-term consequences to ever have to worry about. Then, we learned how to control fire, and our technology began to advance, and that changed everything. As our tools advanced, we began to be able to harm, manipulate, and gradually start to manage our environment, adding a financial component along the way. We didn't realize it at the time, but each decision had become more complex, involving social, economic, and environmental elements to have to consider. My father worked out that almost every decision we make basically involves these three elements to have to balance. Decisions are made by people, which shows it will have short and long-term social effects to consider, from the decision maker to customers, sellers, friends, families, colleagues, etc. The same decision will have short and long-term environmental considerations because everything we produce, use, or consume comes from nature. And almost everything we use or do costs money, so the decision will usually have short-term and definitely have long-term financial considerations. And he discovered that we cannot single out and manage any one of those elements without it knocking on to affect all of them at some point. But because our minds are only designed to have to address our needs or problems from one simple perspective, we single out each element and make decisions about them in isolation. So when our decisions became more complex, we instinctively broke those three elements down into manageable parts, separating the inseparable and making our decisions from either a social, financial, or ecological perspective. Every government in the world has separate social, financial, and environmental ministries, yet social and economic health is inseparable from ecological health. That is the indivisible complexity every policy decision involves. A simple analogy of this would be to liken it to us trying to manage water by making decisions about the hydrogen or oxygen in isolation of each other. We'd form a Ministry of Oxygen and a Ministry of Hydrogen, with each ministry calling in expert advice on policies, top hydrogen experts who have never studied oxygen, top oxygen experts with zero understanding of hydrogen, and nobody with any understanding or ever having studied water. Policies get developed based on advice about each separate element, which inevitably knocks on to upset the water, but because the damaging long-term consequences are only being felt sometime after and often far away from the decision, nobody is connecting consequences to decisions. Nobody can see why the water is increasingly unstable because the best hydrogen and oxygen experts were consulted and they must know how to manage those things. But nobody has been aware of an inherited process. No one knew that managing all the elements of each decision is vital. We didn't know we had to manage the hydrogen and oxygen simultaneously. Nobody has been considering the water as a whole. This is happening with every decision and policy on Earth, even when people take a holistic or systems thinking approach, or even if an interdisciplinary team of scientists is brought in to work on a project. They approach the water as a whole, but when it comes to decisions, they break it down into manageable parts and make decisions based on expert advice for the hydrogen or oxygen, but never for the water. No matter how much our reductionist decisions upset the balance, our societies, economies, and nature are constantly self-organizing and continuing, albeit in changed form. And they are now dangerously unstable, culminating in global ecological collapse and climate change. Environmental health is paramount, and without it nobody on Earth can have social or economic stability. But because each decision is complex and involves three elements to think about, we cannot make a decision towards the health of the environment alone, because it also includes longer-term social and economic elements. We must simultaneously balance the short and long-term social, economic, and environmental components of each decision or policy. We are getting into increasing conflict with people demanding better ecological decisions, but nobody can make a decision that puts the environment first if it will end up crippling them economically and therefore socially. We have to consistently balance this complexity. For example, a cattle farmer might have the best intentions about farming regeneratively, but let's say he has a tick problem because his land is degraded and biodiversity is low. He knows dipping isn't good for the environment and that he must increase biodiversity, but if he suddenly stopped dipping altogether, the knock-on consequences would be devastating. His cattle would get sick and he could lose a lot of his herd, which would end up crippling him financially and socially in the long run. So he has to make the best decision he can at any given time, given his unique and complex circumstances. While keeping environmental health paramount, he must also simultaneously consider and balance the short and long-term social and economic consequences of the decision. Doing this is made easy using the guiding filtering process of the holistic management framework. It guarantees decision makers always look for and find the best possible decision because the process is based on the fact that environmental health is paramount while still understanding that there are always social and financial consequences tied into each decision, which must be tested and balanced out. Making this change is simple, but like anything new, it involves a bit of practice, learning how to balance the elements of each decision. It results in a weaning off of environmentally damaging actions, leading to steady biodiversity increase and soil health. Holistic managers consistently make the best decisions for their circumstances by always adapting to and flowing with the full social, cultural, financial, and environmental elements of each potential action. We must ensure the best decision for the unique complexity involved is made in any situation, which is why we cannot continue to copy and paste practices, ideas, policies, or advice. We must first test for ourselves whether any action will be appropriate for the complexity involved, and if it does look good, we then test for any adjustments needed in order to adapt it to suit our own unique circumstances. As soon as we do this and address the cause of our mounting problems, the symptoms will begin to fall away. Right now, our inherited process is still causing us to separate the three elements of our decisions or policies and make them from an isolated perspective, usually revolving around financial gain. One of the most damaging symptoms of this is agriculture revolving around pushing for the technological quick fix of pumping chemicals into the product to meet the short-term objective of producing as much as possible as quickly and cheaply as possible with no consideration to the inevitable and devastating long-term consequences. Our inherited way of making decisions is reactive. So as soon as those chemicals or the action taken to address a problem show signs of failure, we react to the problem by increasing the strength and quantity of our attack, which just results in bigger and bigger problems. Because of this unbalanced reactive way of making decisions, just like a junkie's worn-out body, our environment and our problems demand harsher and harsher stimulation to produce the same high. The first country to develop an agricultural policy using the guiding filtering process of the holistic management framework and tie their country's social and economic stability to ecological health would be the first country in history to address the root cause of global desertification and climate change. Whichever world leader is brave enough to lead this change would create a global shift and set off a domino effect across the world. The risk of any government doing this is zero. The reward is securing our future, and that is priceless.